bit of a travelogue involved with these stories tonight. My wife and I went to Ireland while we still could. And I'll show you a little bit of what we saw. The first story I'm going to tell in this very typical Irish countryside. Uh, this particular stone fence is on the island of Inishmore. Uh, it's not that big of an island, but it says they have, and they're not kidding, 1,000 miles of stone wall on this one island. It's pretty incredible. So this is just so typical of what we saw. I thought I'd tell the first story here out in the open air by this Irish stone wall. And the story I'm going to tell is a story I call the Hill of Not Graston. There was a young man whose body was so twisted by a hump on his back that when he sat down, his chin rested on his knee. He was so misshapen that when people saw him waddling down the road towards them, they would look the other way and pretend they didn't see him. He was that hard to look at. If little children saw him, they would go crying to their mothers. Older children would throw stones at him. But as twisted as his body was, as ill-treated as he was that gentle and kind on the inside. He tried not to feel sorry for himself. He always said his prayers morning, noon, and night. Now, everyone has their talents, and he had two. One, he had a good singing voice, but he never sang for anyone but himself, for his own entertainment, as little as that was. The second was he could plait straw into wonderful, intricate straw hats. It might be because his hands were always so close to his eyes, but he was the best at his trade. And that is how he made his living. Every day he would go out after morning prayer and find a sprig of fairy cap, also known as foxglove, also known as Lismore. And he would put that in his straw hat. And because of that, everyone called him Lismore. Lismore was traveling from the Care, the market at Care, on his way home to Capa. And he had left a little too late, and he walked so slowly that by the time he was at Not Grafton, the moon had set and it was totally dark. He could not see his hand in front of his face. Well, he decided to sleep on the leeward side of Not Grafton, which was an old, at one time, ancient times, a fortified hill. He laid down, hoping he could rest and maybe sleep, when he heard music. And it sounded like it was coming from inside the hill. And the harder he listened, the more he could hear. And after a time, he could start to make out the melody. Oh, it sounded as if little silver bells had voices. It was unearthly, beautiful. The harmonies weaving in and out. And the more he listened, the more he heard. But the lyrics, they were singing Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday. Then they would pause. And they'd start the round again. Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday. Well, he listened to this, and after a time, he thought it would drive him mad. There was no resolve to this tune. So finally, When they went through the round again, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, he added, and Wednesday too. At that moment, he was lifted into the air, spun around gently, and taken into the fairy mound, for that's what this was. And he found himself in the fairy hall with bright lights and the fairies, 100 of them, crowding around him and saying, Lismore, Lismore, your verse we adore. Sing with us more, Lismore. Well, on they sang, and the fairies brought him food to eat and drink. Well, it was fairy portions of food in very small cups. But it was the best food and the best wine he had ever tasted. And as they made merry, Lismore noticed that the king of the fairies and some of his lords were talking with each other and looking back at him, and began to wonder, was he a captive? Were they ever going to let him go? Was he going to be here forever? And the king of the fairies came up to him. He said, Lismore, Lismore, doubt not nor deplore. The hump which you bore on your back is no more. Look to the floor and see it, Lismore. As he spoke, Lismore felt the hump on his back, sliding from his flesh, and fell to the ground. Oh, he felt so light. He would have stood up, but the ceiling of their hall was so low. All he could do was stretch out straight, which was something he had never done before. It felt so good that he gave a great laugh, and the fairies cheered. And then a weariness came over him, and he fell into a deep, deep sleep. When he awoke, he was lying at the foot of Not Graston, with cows and sheep grazing around him, the sun high in the sky. Well, he fell to his knees and said his morning prayers, and he stood up and felt on his back there was no hump. And he had on a fine suit of clothing. The fairies had thrown that in as well. Well, he looked around for a sprig of fairy cap of Lismore. He stuck that in his hat, his straw hat, and started on his way back to Kapa. Now, anyone seeing him walking down the road, he was a young man walking down the road. But for Lismore, he was walking on air. When he got to Kapa, the people saw him and said, You are wearing Lismore's hat. Where is Lismore? What have you done with him? I am a Lismore. No, you are not Lismore. What have you done with Lismore? And Lismore told them the story, and they did not believe him. He said, wait. And he took straw, and he plaited it into a marvelous straw hat, and they looked at it. And they said, only Lismore can do work like this. You must be Lismore. Well, the story of what had happened to Lismore spread through the countryside. Everyone was talking about him, high and low, rich and poor. Well, one day Lismore was sitting outside of his home, plaiting straw. An old woman came up to him and said, Can you tell me the way to Kapa? And he said, You are in the way of Kapa. Then can you point me to a fellow named Lismore? He said, Easily done. She said, I have a neighbor who has a son with a hump on his back, like you once had. I am told that the fairies took your hump away. Said Lismore. And he told her the whole story. And when he had, she turned around and she went back to Waterford, where she had come from. She and her friend loaded the young man with a hump onto a cart, and they started to wheel him to Not Grafton. Now, this lad with a hump was named Jack Madden, and he was of a different sort of person than Lismore. As twisted and ugly as he was that way on the inside. He never said his prayers. He always complained. And he wanted everyone else to feel sorry for him, even more sorry than he felt for himself. Well, he complained all the way to Not Grafton. They unloaded him, put him on the ground, told him what he must do, and they left him there complaining. Well, as the sun set, he began to hear the fairy music. He thought, this is better. And he listened, and they were singing the song that Lismore had added to. Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday too. And Jack Madden had Thursday, Friday, don't forget. Well, everyone has their talents, but singing was not one of his. He was born without a bucket in which to carry a tune, nor could he keep a rhythm. But he thought by adding 2 days to the song, he'd get 2 new suits of clothing for his effort. But the fairies did not see it that way. He was raised up into the air, whirled around, and thrown into the fairy mound. He landed with a thump, and the fairies gathered around him, shouting, "Who ruined our song? Who ruined our song?" And the king and the fairies came up to him and said, Jack Madden, Jack Madden, your words were so bad in the song we were glad in. This castle you're hadden, so your life we may sadden. It's 2 humps for Jack Madden. And with horror, he saw some of the fairies pick up Lismore's hump, and they put it on his back beside the other. And it attached itself as if the best carpenter in Ireland had hammered it in with 12 penny nails. In the morning, when the 2 old women came around, they found Jack Madden there near dead. Now they looked at each other, loaded him into the cart, and took him home without a word, lest they offend the fairies further. Well, Jack Madden, he didn't live much longer after that. And when he died, all he left behind was a curse on anyone who might go to Not Grafton and listen for the fairy music. And that's the story of the Hill of Not Graston. I'm listening to silent applause. Well, my next story. It's really a bit of the Irish mythology. And it has, a different take on the fairies, if you will. You see behind me what's known as the Dun Angus, which is a Bronze Age fort. What's interesting about it is the stone walls on 3 sides, but the 4th side of the fort is a cliff, a 300-foot drop into the sea. So if anyone were to attack them, they could only attack on 3 sides. The 4th side, there was no approaching it. So this story is a bit of the, as I said, Irish legend. And it's called Cormac MacArt Goes to Fairy. Cormac, son of Art, grandson of Conn of the 100 Battles, was High King of Ireland. His court was at the Hill of Tara. One day, he saw on the green a lad with a shining fairy branch, at the end of which were 9 red apples. And when he shook the fairy branch, such fairy music poured from it that anyone who heard it, who was ill or injured, would fall into a restorative sleep. And anyone who heard it, who was well, was filled with a sense of well-being and peace. Cormac said to the lad, "Is that branch your own?" The lad said, "It is mine." "Will you sell it to me? At what price?" And the lad said, "Will you give me for it what I ask?" And Cormac said, "I will give you anything." Now, Cormac thought that this fairy branch was worth his entire kingdom. But that is not what the lad asked for. The lad asked for his wife, his son, and his daughter. Now, a king, when they give their word, they cannot back down. It is their vow. He had to give the lad what he asked for. His wife, his children were distraught at the price of the fairy branch. But Cormac just shook the fairy branch, and they were filled with a sense of peace and well-being, and willingly they followed the lad away. The subjects were upset. They had lost their queen, but he shook the fairy branch, and all were content and all was peaceful. And this is how he kept the peace. But in a year, he decided he would go and try to find his wife and children. And he took with him the fairy branch, hoping he could trade for it. And he followed the path he saw them take. And as he went down that path with these thoughts in his heart, a gray mist rose up around him. And when it cleared, he was on a broad plain, in the middle of which was a house. And as he went towards the house, he saw there were men on the roof, thatching it with feathers, marvelous, colorful bird feathers, feathers from birds that Cormac knew he had never seen. And they were men riding away and men riding back, carrying bags of feathers. And as the men thatched one side of the house and started on the other, by the time they had finished that side, the feathers of the first side had all dissipated, gone away, and they had to start over again. King Cormac watched this for a while, but he did not understand, and he traveled on. Next, he came to a lad. He was chopping wood and building a fire. And when he had the fire going well, he left to get more wood. Until he came back, the fire had burned down, was almost out, and he started over again. Build up the fire, and then left to get more wood, and the fire burnt down. Over and over he did this, and King Cormac watched but did not understand. He traveled on. He came to 3 wells. At the foot of each well was a head. Out of the mouth of one head flowed 2 streams. Out of the mouth of the other head flowed 1 stream. And from the third, nothing at all. He pondered this, but again, he did not understand. Before night fell, he came to another house. And this one he entered and greeted the occupants. They welcomed him as a guest. So a tall man and his wife, both dressed in multicolored robes. And the wife said to the husband to go and get their guests some food. He went out, and when he came back, he had a boar over his shoulder and was carrying a log. He threw that on the ground in front of King Cormac and said, "There, you can make yourself a meal." Oh, King Cormac looked at the boar and the log and said, I don't know how to go about doing that." "Ah," said the host, "I will show you." And he quartered the hog, and he split the log into 4 pieces and laid the log with a quarter of the hog on top in 4 piles. And then he said, "Now, as we tell a true story, one of the quarters will cook itself." King Cormac said, "Well, please show me. Tell me the first story." And the host said, "I have 7 swine like this one, with which I could probably feed the world. After we have feasted, I will take the bones of this one and throw it back into its sty. And in the morning, it will have returned alive." Well, as he spoke, the log under the first quarter flamed up and cooked the meat. King Cormac asked his hostess to tell the next story. She said, "I have 7 white cows that give 7 cauldrons of milk every day. If the men of the world were assembled outside the house, I could feed them all." And now it was King Cormac's turn, because the second quarter had now been cooked. And he told them the story of the lad with the fairy branch and how he was now searching for his wife and his children. And as he spoke, the third quarter burst into flames and cooked itself. And his host said, "That is a true story. And if that is a true story, then you must be King Cormac, son of Art, grandson of Conn of the 100 Battles." King Cormac said, "I am." And the fourth quarter was cooked. "We can have our feast now," said the host. "Oh," said King Cormac, "this is a poor feast without more friends and family." "Ah," said the host, "perhaps you would like more of your family?" "That is what I am seeking," said King Cormac. And with that, a door opened, and out came Cormac's wife, son, and daughter. For all the time they were gone, here is where they were. Well, there was such a greeting. And when Cormac looked around, his host had transformed into his true self, which was the god Mamanon Maclair, leader of the fairy cavalcade. And he said, "I was the lad who sold you the fairy branch, knowing that you would come here and see what you have saw and learn what you will learn." Then said Cormac, "Teach me, who were the men feathering the roof of the house?" And Mamanon said, "They were the likeness of men who go out to find fortune and fame, but come home again to find their house is no real shelter, and what they bring with them dissipates, and they go out again for more fame and fortune and come back to an empty house. And what of the lad building the fire? He is the likeness of men who work for others. Always they are building the fire, tending the fire, but they never get to warm themselves by it. And the 3 wells and the 3 heads? Those are the likeness of the 3 kinds of men. The first was the men who give freely. The second was the men who give what they need to give, but no more. The third, and these are the worst types of men, who will give nothing. But now, let me show you some other wonders. And he brought out a cup and put it before King Cormac and said, "This cup, when a falsehood is spoken, it shatters. When the truth is spoken, it mends itself." "Ah," said the king, "that is a wonder." And here is another. And men put out a tablecloth. King Cormac, "What would you like?" King Cormac said, "Well, if we were to have a feast, I think we need good drink for all." And as he spoke those words, cups of fine wine appeared in front of everyone. The man said, "This tablecloth will provide any food that you wish for." Well, now the feast started in earnest. And they ate and they ate. And they simply wished for whatever wonderful thing they wanted to taste, and it was there. And when they had eaten their fill, beds were made, and all went to sleep. When King Cormac woke up, he was back at the Hill of Tara. Beside him slept his wife. And on the other side of him was the cup of truth and falsehood, the tablecloth that provided, and the fairy branch. And that is the story of Cormac MacArt Goes to Fairy. Well, I think we're going to move along to the Cliffs of Moher. This is one of our favorite spots. It's on the west coast of Ireland. It's a wild-looking country. And I chose this for our setting for the next story, which is kind of a wild story. It's called The Black Horse. There was a king who had 3 sons. And when he died, the youngest son inherited not but a shadow of an inheritance. He got an old, lame, white horse. And he said to himself, "Is this the best that can be done? It's best I be going." And off he went to try his luck somewhere else. All he took with him was his inheritance, the old white horse, and the fact that he was a king's son. Well, he rode down the road for a bit, and then he led his horse for a while. And then he was letting his old white mare graze when he saw a lad riding a fine black steed coming down the road. "Hail, lad," he said, "what news?" The lad called back, "I have no news worth reporting, but I see you have a gentle white horse. Would you trade your horse for this cantankerous black horse?" Well, the king's son knew his horses. And he said, "That would not be a fair trade. You can see she is an old mare and she is lame. Yours is a fine steed." "Well, that may be," said the lad. "And while this horse can carry its rider to any place in the 4 parts of the wheel of the world by just thinking of it, he is so spirited I cannot stay in the saddle. Your horse, I'm a light load. I will not hurt its limp." Well, the king's son thought about that, and he saw the lad had a point, and he made the trade. Well, when he was on the black, he decided he would try this outrageous claim that the horse would take him anywhere he could think of. And he thought to himself of the realm under the waves. The horse raced off, his hooves as like touching the earth as not. And before the sun rose, they were in the realm under the waves. And the prince of that realm was holding court. And he had just declared that he would marry the daughter of the king of the Greeks, and that he wanted someone to bring her to him. Well, all the people of the court knew that the daughter of the king of the Greeks did not necessarily want to marry the prince of the realm. And they were not willing to do so. When in came the king's son. "You," said the prince of the realm, "you, the rider of the black horse, I put crosses and spells upon you. Bring to me the daughter of the king of the Greeks, and do it sooner than you may." Well, the young man went back out to the black horse, and he laid his elbow on the horse's mane and sighed. And the black horse said, "That's the sigh of a king's son who needs to get the daughter of the king of the Greeks. I know where she is. Mount me, and we'll be there as soon as we may." Well, he got on to the black horse, and off they went, as if they were the wind itself. Before long, they came to the town of the king of the Greeks. And the black horse said, "Now, put on your best horsemanship, and we'll ride through the town. The princess will see us, and she knows a good horse when she sees one, and she will want to ride me. Get her on the saddle behind you, and I will do the rest." Well, they rode into the town, and they were quite a sight. And the princess noticed them, and she came down from the castle and said, "Sir, may I have a ride on your horse?" He said, "Ah, lady, this horse will only let me ride him, but you can ride on the back behind me." And she said, "You are a stranger, sir. Let us see if one of my horsemen can ride him." Well, he got down, and one of her horsemen, approached the black horse. It just about killed him. "I see," said the princess. "Well then, I will ride behind you." He got back on, gave her a hand up, and before she knew it, she was closer to the sky than she was to the ground. And before morning, they were back in the realm under the waves. And the prince of the realm called out, "You have returned." And the king's son, "I have returned." "I," said the prince, "am the son of success, and I shall marry the princess." The princess said, "Gently, gently. This wedding is not as near as you think. I cannot be wed until I have the silver cup. That was at my grandmother's wedding, and also at my mother's wedding. It must be at my wedding." Now the prince of the realm said, "Rider of the black horse, I put spells and crosses upon you. Go get the silver cup and be back sooner than you can." Off went the lad and leaned his shoulder on the horse's mane, and he sighed. That's the sigh of a king's son who has to retrieve the silver cup. I know how you can do that. Mount me, and off we'll go. Well, off they went, back to the town of the Greeks. And the black horse said, "Now, I will wait here. You go into the castle as if you belong there. The king has missed his daughter. All of his friends and relatives have gathered around to comfort him. They're sitting around a great table, and while they're sitting there, the silver cup will be passed around. When you get the chance, slip it under your cloak. Come back to me, and we'll be off." Well, this he did. He went into the castle, and because he was a king's son and he looked like a king's son, the guards just let him walk in. He sat down at the table. And as the silver cup was passed around and it came to him, he looked at it, he admired it, and when he saw no one was looking at him, he slipped it under his cloak and left. To the black horse, and off they went. And before the sun rose, they were back in the realm under the waves. I have returned. You are here, said the prince of the realm. You are the king of a sun, and I am the king of success. Now I shall marry the princess. Softly, softly, said the princess. Not quite yet. Before we can have the wedding, I must have the silver ring that my grandmother wore, and that my mother wore. I must wear that silver ring at my wedding. Rider of the black horse, I put this onus upon you, and come back sooner than you may. Off went the lad back to the horse, and but the black horse said, the silver ring. That is a task harder than I have ever performed. Between us and the silver ring is a mountain of snow, a mountain of ice, a mountain of fire, and that's just the start. But there is no help for it. Mount me and we shall try. Off they went, and when they got to the mountain of snow, the king's son spurred his horse and it leapt to the top of the mountain of snow. From there to the top of the mountain of ice. From there to the top of the mountain of fire, and down the side through the flames. Well, the king's horse was clinging to his horse's neck by the time they got to the bottom. And then the horse said, that village yonder, go to its smithy and have iron spikes, sharp on both ends, as many as I have bones in my body. And this the king's son did. And when he came back, the horse said, now, that lake yonder, it's 7 miles wide and 7 miles long. When I jump into it, its surface will burst into flames, and it will burn all night. In the morning, if the flames die down, you will see me again. If not, go your own way. But first, drive the iron spikes into my body at the ends of every bone in my body. With sadness, this he did. And when the black horse jumped into the lake, it burst into flames and burned all night. And as dawn crept into the sky, the flames still burned. And the king's son began to despair. But when the sun crested the horizon, the flames began to dissipate. And the horse came to the surface, thrashed its way to the shore, and collapsed on the bank, with one iron spike still in its body. And at the end of that iron spike was a silver ring. The king's son took the ring, pulled out the iron spike from its body, and dragged the horse up to the grass and laid himself over it to warm the horse against the cold of the morning. And as the sun rose, the horse revived. And by noon it got to its feet and said, mount, we must be going. And off they went, up the side of the mountain of fire, over the mountain of ice, the mountain of snow, down the other side. And before the sun rose again, they were back in the realm under the waves. You have returned, said the prince. I have returned, said the king's son. You are the son of success, but then so am I. Now the prince and I shall marry. Wait, wait, she said. I will not marry until you make me a castle. I will not live in your father's castle. I will not live in your mother's castle. I will only live in a castle greater than theirs. And the prince of the realm said, rider of the black horse. Yes, yes, said the rider of the black horse. And off he went. And when he came to the black horse, the horse said, I have traveled many roads. I have performed many tasks, but this is the simplest. Look behind you. And when he turned around, there were innumerable masons and carpenters, like ants on an anthill, building a fabulous castle. And by the morning, it was finished. And the king's son called out, "Prince of the realm, it is done." And the prince of the realm was amazed at the magnificence of this castle. He said, "I am the son of success. Now she must marry me." "Wait, wait," said the princess. "There's time before the wedding. We must inspect this castle." And they went inside and they inspected the castle from the dungeons to the top of the highest parapets. And she found no fault. "Ah," said the prince of the realm, "but I have found a fault. There is no well inside the castle where we can draw water for the wedding feast and the feasts afterwards." And the king's son said, "It shall be done." And later that day, as the prince of the realm and the prince of the Greeks were on their way to the wedding, they stopped by to inspect the well. The well was 3 fathoms wide and 7 fathoms deep. The prince said, "Ah, this is a fine well." And the princess said, "Yes, but there is one flaw." "Where? Where?" said the prince of the realm. "Right down there," she said. And as he looked down into the well, she stood behind him and with both hands pushed him into the well. "If I must marry, it will not be to you. I will marry the man who is come to make all these extraordinary things to pass, if he will have me." Well, the king's son said he would, and off they went to the wedding. 3 years later, the king's son remembered the black horse. He jumped up from where he was sitting, ran out to where he had left the black horse, and the black horse was still there. "Well," said the horse, "I imagine you have found someone you are more fond of than I." I am most fond of you. I'm as fond of you as any creature that has ever lived. Something made me forget." And the black horse nickered and said, "Be that as it may, the time has come. Pull your sword from your sheath." And this the son of the king did. And then the black horse said, "Cut off my head." "Fortune forbid that I should do such a thing." "Fortune commands that you do. Do it this moment or I will kill you." And with that, he cut off the horse's head. Then he dropped the sword, putting his hands on either side of his head, gave a doleful cry, when from behind him a voice spoke, "Hail, brother-in-law." And when he turned around, there was the finest man that he had ever laid eyes on. And the man said, "What think you of the black horse?" And the king's son said, "This is the creature I was most fond of any in the world." "Well then," said the man, "be that fond of me, for I was the black horse. From the time of my enchantment, no one could keep me for more than a day or two. I was too much for them. But when I found you, you were a worthy horseman, a worthy person to ride on me. And now you have come to the end of the enchantment, and you have released me. Now you, your wife, who is my sister, we will return to my father's kingdom and celebrate a second wedding." And that is where this story ends. Well, I have one more story for you, and it's time for us to retire to a pub. We are in the Nancy Hands, one of our favorite hangouts in the marvelous city of Dublin. And this just seems to be an appropriate place to tell this final story. It's called Master and Man. Billy McDaniels was a wastrel of the man as ever carried a shillelagh. He feared for nothing but the lack of drink. He cared for nothing but who might pay for it. And he thought of nothing but how much fun he might have, sober or drunk. The sort of man who would fall in with bad company. And the bad company that he fell in with was that of the good people. He was returning from the tavern one night, cold December night. Oh, the moon was shining bright. The stars were clear, but it was cold. Then he said out loud, "My word, it's cold. It's so cold it'll freeze my soul. I would for another round of drink. I wish for the finest whiskey." And a voice beside him piped up, "You needn't wish it twice, Billy McDaniels." Oh, and he looked down. There was a wee man with a tri-corner hat, gold thread all around its edges, and gold buckles on his boots. Oh, so big you hardly think he could walk. And he was holding a glass of whiskey, almost as big as himself. Well, Billy McDaniels knew this was one of the fair folk. And by his dress, a leprechaun. But that didn't faze Billy for a moment. He took the glass of whiskey and said, "Success, and to your health." And he drank it down, all without a second breath. "And health to you, Billy McDaniel," said the leprechaun. "Ah, but Billy, don't think you're not going to pay for it." "Pay for it," said Billy. "I haven't got a halfpenny in my pocket." "And well, I know it. Therefore, you will be my servant tonight. I have some carrying I need you to do for me." Well, Billy didn't know how he was going to get out of this one, but knew he'd have to play along for at least a while. He said, "No, very well, sir. Where is this thing you want me to carry?" Oh, not yet, not yet. There's some traveling to be done first. So go over there and get 2 of those horses for us." No, Billy looked around and then he said, "Well, sir, I don't mean to be difficult, but I don't see any horses. All I see is a stand of bulrushes." "Oh, is that what you see? Well then, go over there and get us 2 bulrushes." Well, that was easily enough. The ground and the water were frozen. He went over and he snapped off 2 of the bulrushes and came back, and he gave one to the wee man, who put it between his legs and said, "All right then, get on." Well, Billy thought this was about the silliest thing he had ever seen, but he put the bulrush between his legs. At that moment, the bulrush swelled up into the finest black horse he had ever seen. But Billy had been a little bit careless about how he put the bulrush between his legs, and well, he put the head of it towards the back of him, and he was now sitting backwards on this horse. Well, he hadn't a moment to correct himself, and off went the black horses, their hooves not touching the ground. He had to hang on for dear life to the horse's tail. Off they went, much to Billy's distress. And it wasn't until they finally come down in front of a fine house that as they landed, the black horses shrank down into the bulrushes again. And the leprechaun said, "Well, fine servant I have. He doesn't know a horse's head from a horse's..." Oh, I'll let that pass. Here, follow me. And they went around to the back of this grand house until they came to a door that was halfway under the ground. Billy tried the door and said, "It's locked." Well, of course it's locked. Well then, sir, have you the key? A key. A key. Do you see a ring of keys on me? Here, put your hand on my arm. Well, Billy put his hand on his arm, and they both turned into smoke, passed through the keyhole of the door, and came to themselves on the other side. Well, Billy found himself in this rich man's wine cellar. Well, said Leprechaun, let's see, Malbec, bit of dry sack. Ah, the whiskey. Help yourself, Billy. Well, Billy needed no more prompting than that. And very shortly, they were deep into their cups. Well, after a time, the Leprechaun turned to Billy and said, now then, tomorrow I will be 1,000 years old. Well, said Billy, God bless you. Don't say his name in front of me again, or I'll thrash you. As I was saying, tomorrow I will be 1,000 years old, and it's time for me to take a wife. This evening in Limerick, there will be a marriage. Darby O'Reilly wants to marry Bridget Rooney. Now, Bridget Rooney, she's a fine girl, tall, straight, good family. I mean to marry her myself. No, said Billy. Don't you think Darby O'Reilly will have something to say about that? He'll have nothing to say about it. Oh, well, sir, I was thinking. Don't go off thinking. That's not what I brought you along for. I brought you along to do the carrying. When I said, I mean to take a wife, I mean to take a wife. And it's you who will carry her out. Now, finish your drink and we'll be off. Well, Billy finished his whiskey and he put his arm on the Leprechaun's arm and turned into smoke through the keyhole. They picked up their bulrushes, and Billy was careful this time about where the head of the bulrush was. And off they went through the air, lickety-split, like the wind itself. And they came down in front of a sturdy farmhouse there in Limerick. And out of this house poured the sound of laughter and good conversation. Again, Billy put his hand on the Leprechaun's arm. They turned into smoke through the keyhole, and they went up to the rafters in this grand house, and they were looking down on the wedding table as they sat there on their rafter. Well, they could see there the priest, and on either side of him was the bride and the groom. And he was just being served the prime piece of pork. And he was having such a great, thankful exclamation about this pork, and he was raising quite a row. The Leprechaun raised his right hand, and looking at Bridget O'Reilly, the bride, flicked his little finger. And with that, she sneezed. Now, the priest should have been the one to say, God bless you. But he was preoccupied with this portion of pork. And everyone else, knowing it was the priest who should have said, God bless you, didn't. And the moment passed, and the sneeze went unblessed. And the little man said, that's one, two more, and she's mine. Well, at that point, everyone settled down to eating, and all you could hear was a muffled sound of chewing and the clink of knives and forks on plates. And the little man sat there twiddling his thumbs, just waiting for his next chance. And during that hiatus, Billy McDaniel had what passed for him as a religious experience. His conscience was pricked. He saw that young bride there, very beautiful. He looked at this wizened old creature beside him. And back at this bride, oh, she could hardly be much more than 19 years old. And this creature who was a day shy of 1,000, he thought it'd be quite a shame that if they should get married, especially with the bride unwilling. But about then, someone in the wedding party rose and started to orator, make a speech. And he was carrying on. And when he made a great compliment to the groom, there was a great huzzah! And while that was going on, the leprechaun raised his hand and, looking at the bride, flicked a finger, and she sneezed a second time. But with all the huzzahs, nobody heard, and nobody said, "God bless you." Well, at this point, Billy McDaniels was remembering all the manners that his mother had taught him, and especially about when somebody sneezed, somebody ought to say, "God bless you." And then the orator, he sat down, and there was a great round of applause, and the leprechaun lifted his right hand, looking at the bride, flicked his finger, and she sneezed for a third time. But that was too much for Billy McDaniels. He cupped his hands and said, "God bless you!" The leprechaun turned red as a radish and screamed at Billy McDaniel, "I dismiss you from my service and take this as payment," and gave Billy such a kick that he flew off of the rafter, down onto the wedding table, face flat. There was a shocked moment of silence, and all that could be heard was Billy McDaniel moaning. But then the wedding party picked him up, put him on his feet, and every finger in the room was pointing at him, and every voice was shouting at him. And Billy was trying to say, the leprechaun, the bulrushes, horses, smoke. Finally, the priest quieted everyone down and said, "Young man, tell us your name, then tell us your story. Start at the beginning and don't stop till you come to the end." "Well, sir, I am Billy McDaniel, and I was leaving the pub tonight, minding my own business when," and he told them the whole story, right up to when he fell face flat onto the wedding table. Well, everyone looked at each other, wondering, should they believe such a wild tale? But then Bridget Rooney said, "I did sneeze 3 times, and only he said, 'God bless you.'" Well, when they heard that, the priest stood up, the bride and the groom stood up. The bridesmaids came running over along with the best men and the parents. They got into their formation, and they conducted the wedding forthwith. And when Darby and Bridget were married, well, it was time to celebrate. They moved the tables aside, they brought out the musical instruments, and they began to dance. Well, everyone except Billy McDaniel. They found him the most comfortable chair. They plied him with food and drink, and more drink. And Billy, being the hero of the day, they gave him more drink until he felt no pain. And that's the story of Man and Master. Well, I guess I'll take you back to my library now. I do hope you enjoyed these tales. I enjoyed telling them to you. And I guess for now, I'll simply say adieu. Have a good evening. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Charles. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Are there any questions?
Yes. If anyone would like to type in the chat, you can also go ahead and unmute your mic. We'll be happy to answer accordingly.
Yeah, one of the strangest things about the Black Horse story in particular, that is, I consider, quite a wild tale, this whole horrible image of him driving spikes into the horse's flesh.
Yes.
There is another story. It's actually a Grimm story called the Dapplegrim.
Okay.
And it's a very similar story. There's a wedding. Things have to be achieved for the wedding. And in that story, one of the things is they need for the bride a horse as worthy as Dapplegrim to ride on. And Dapplegrim has to fight this other horse to tame it. And in that battle, his master puts an ox hide studded with iron spikes as armor. And Dapplegrim fights the other horse in this field covered with tar that has been set aflame by the other horse's fiery breath. Yeah, it's the same story. It came from the same place. But it's like, what is this thing with the iron spike? This is what I love reading these stories for. You come up with these things. And 5 years from now, I'll come up with another tale. I'll read another tale where, oh, there's the iron spikes again, but this time they're who knows where. That's the wonderful thing about researching these fairy tales. You can just keep reading and reading and reading, and well, at least I never get tired of them.
So that actually gets to a question we have in the chat. We have Bill asking, where did you come across these stories? So I assume from reading then.
Yes, from reading. Two of these stories, Not Grafton, The Black Horse, and Cormac Goes to Fairy, they all came from more Celtic fairy tales by Joseph Jacobs. Joseph Jacobs wrote Celtic fairy tale. He collected the tales and put them in Celtic fairy tales, more Celtic fairy tales, English fairy tales, more English fairy. You get the idea.
Yeah.
Joseph Jacobs has a wonderful collection of tales, and I often go to that well. The other story, the Billy McDaniel, Master and Man, that came from a collection that was gathered by Yeats. I think it's called Irish Fairy Tales or something very simple like that, but it was actually Yeats who collected the tales.
Alrighty, there we go.
Yeah.
We have.
Let me also mention another source for fairy tales in general. It's called the Colored Fairy Books. By, and now his name escapes me. That'll come back to me. But there's the Blue Fairy Book, the Yellow Fairy Book, the Gray Fairy Book, and Violet Fairy Book. They go on, and there's hundreds and hundreds of very good fairy tales in this collection.
Just from a quick search, is it Lang?
Lang, Andrew Lang, thank you.
Yes.
I kept thinking of Alfred Nutt, and that was one of his other companions. Yes, Andrew Lang.
Alrighty. So you heard it here first, folks.
Yes.
So we've got 2 more questions here. One from Tracy. Someone had sent to her privately. How do you remember all of these stories?
I like to say I don't.
All right.
I live with these stories.
Okay.
I own them. All these stories, I come up with my own versions of the stories. I don't memorize it from its original source word for word. And one, I have no problem with that because there is no original source for any of these stories. It goes so far back in time. A lot of people think about Grimm. Grimm, they were just collecting those stories, and they would collect a couple different versions of the stories. And then Wilhelm in particular would write them out, and he had his own particular style. And some of those stories we're a little bit on the pagan side. So he rewrote them a couple years later to be much more Christian. So
Hmm.
people have changed these stories and moved them around constantly.
Right.
I remain faithful to the message of the story,
Hmm.
but I do find my own words. So
Okay.
I own the stories, and that's the best way I can tell them. There's another way of telling stories, which my friend Larry Skierman talks about. He talks about when he tells a story, he walks through Larryland.
Okay.
What he sees in Larryland is what he tells. So every teller has their
Fascinating.
own way of doing this.
Hmm.
Memorizing is the least favorite way to learn a
Hmm.
story.
No, I can imagine that would be a lot to try to get in your head, and a
Yeah.
lot to and less creative as well, right? If you're attempting to just recite rather than
Every once in a while,
tell a
I
story.
challenge myself and put a little bit of rhyme into the
Mhm.
story. You can't
Mhm.
goof that up. You got to get the rhymes right.
Yes.
I try not to do too much of that, though I do like saying rhymes within the context of fairy
Mhm.
tales. That's a very many authors have done that
Mhm. Yes.
because some of these stories were in fact ballads.
Mhm.
Now the ballad stories became stories and they got turned back into ballads and back and forth. And
Mhm.
a lot of these stories were written at one time and then went into the uneducated people. Uh, one something that happened to me, I was in Pittsburgh actually
Mhm.
telling a story, a group of stories, and afterwards a woman came up to me and said, "When I was a kid, there was a woman in our neighborhood
Mhm.
who would sit on her porch and tell us kids stories all summer long. Every summer night, we'd be on her porch and she would tell us stories. And every year, she would tell us this one. It was really a long story, but
Mhm.
every year she would tell us that story. It was a favorite. And well, I grew up and I went to college. And in English 101, I found out it was the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Good
That
on.
process has happened over and over and over again.
Fantastic for the storyteller there, though, that she was able to remember it so well to perform it.
Yeah.
Truly. Um, and that does lead to our I think the last question we have time for tonight. When traveling, have you come across other storytellers? What was the experience or experiences like?
Oh, I'm a proud member of the Lehigh Valley Storytelling Guild. There are a
All
bunch
right.
of us that we work together. Um, yeah, I was also had the privilege, our guild for a number of years ran a festival
Mhm.
and we would hire national tellers to come. So I got to meet national tellers as well as our regional tellers.
Mhm.
There is quite a network of tellers. Uh,
Mhm.
we don't compete with each other. Um,
Interesting.
we're
Okay.
always supporting each other. It,
Mhm.
there have even been times when tellers have had some sort of personal catastrophe and other tellers have just pitched in with money and aid and help. You know, it's storytellers
That's
are a
wonderful.
community. They really are.
No, that's fantastic. I'm glad then that the experiences you've had have definitely been positive ones.
Oh, yes.
So, one
Oh,
other thing in the chat here from Tracy, just to say the person whose question it was said, thank you for the answer. She enjoyed the presentation and she's looking forward to the next one.
okay.
So,
Very good.
uh, I think that will about wrap it up unless anyone has a last minute question here for Charles. I know many people have left at this point, but do be on the lookout from an email from me in the next day or so with a video link to this video that we are having here right now. And then also a list of library books if you are interested in checking out some more Irish folklore or learning more about Ireland in general. We've compiled a little guide of what you can check out next. So be on the lookout for that too. But other than that, Thank you on behalf of everyone here, Charles. It was absolutely lovely and spellbinding to hear you speak there for the hour, and
Good.
we're glad you could join us tonight.
Well, peace be with you.
Yes. All right. Take care, everybody, and have a wonderful night.